declared by the husband to his wife. Turkey does not recognize the validity of the talaq pronounced within its borders. The prevailing view in the Turkish literature is that a talaq undertaken in Turkey is invalid. However, the recognition of a talaq undertaking outside Turkey seems not to pose a serious problem. It has been noted that a talaq undertaken in a foreign country with the woman's consent could not conflict with the Turkish public policy. But even if the talaq conducted abroad without the consent of the wife, then could be contrary to the Turkish public policy. There is a case which is granted by the Kadıköy Second Court of First Instance. Kadıköy also is a province in Turkey. Kadıköy Court of First Instance concluded that the recognition of a foreign court decision on the divorce through a talaq would not conflict with the public policy on the ground that the divorce at issue resembled consensual divorce under the Turkish Civil Code. Because the husband's wish to divorce through a talaq was accepted by the woman before the Saudi Arabian court. In that case, Seher Şule Koytak, she is a Turkish citizen, and her husband, a Saudi Arabian national, Tarık Faruk Muhammed El Jamjom, went to the religious court in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, and Tarık Faruk El Muhammed declared talaq before the court, and Şule said that I accept this talaq and I would like to also get divorce from this man. And the Jeddah Kadı means a religious judge under the Islamic law, registered this talaq as a judgment. Then Şule, when she came to Turkey, applied to the Turkish court for the recognition of the talaq order granted by the Saudi Arabian court. There were immense discussion over this issue, but the court and the academia accepted that while the consent of the wife is existed in this case, then there is no any incompatibility with the Turkish public policy, and the Kadıköy court recognized this talaq order. But if the talaq order, I have another example. This is the last example, and in a minute I will complete my presentation. I have another talaq which is granted by Jordan court. A man who married a Turkish lady went to the Jordan court and said that I would like to get divorced from N. And the name of the woman is deleted in the Jordan's judgments, therefore I cannot tell it, but her name started with N. And Jordan court accepted the husband talaq's pronunciation of 3 times and recorded it and ordered that this talaq could be served to the wife who live in Turkey. But we cannot accept, of course, recognition of these types of talaqs as there is no any service to the wife to Turkey, and this talaq is contrary to the public policy and also contrary to the fair trial and right to defense. Therefore, we cannot accept those types of talaqs in Turkey. The complementary conditions for the recognition and enforcement of the foreign judgments could be summarized as listed in the, my PowerPoint. These conditions are not clarified clearly in the Private International Law Act. However, we can accept them in academia and in court practice as an obstacles for the recognition of foreign judgments. Thank you very much for the organization committee for their kind of invitation, and also I would like to thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Let's continue with our second guest speaker, Jeremy David Morley.
Okay, hi. So as an international family lawyer, I deal with lots of Turkish-related issues. As with other countries, they often arise with respect to divorce and money and generally about fighting. It's nice when it's about an international prenuptial agreement that involves Turkey, because there for once we have clients that like each other, and we have to tell them that that may not continue. But handling international prenuptial agreements that have a Turkish connection where the parties may end up in Turkey is obviously an integral part of the practice of somebody such as myself. With respect to children, the issues are complex and intense, and for the people involved, they can be very scary. So a typical call that we would get in our office would be from somebody who is living in Istanbul or elsewhere in Turkey. I'm here. He wants me to stay, the father. We're in conflict. My kids are here. I want to go home. Home is America. They may be of Turkish descent. They may not be of Turkish descent. What do you do? You get this emergency call, sometimes late at night. I'm getting on the plane. Can I get on the plane? Is it legal? The answer is it's complicated. So the questions that you need to ask in that kind of a situation are, how long have you been in Turkey? Are you married? Very important for Turkey. If a woman is calling and she is the biological mother and she is not married, then she has custody. The civil code gives her sole custody automatically. Whether that's a violation of international human rights is an interesting question. You would need to discuss with her the fact that the father may run to court and possibly could ask the court for custody. How quickly can that be done? You need to work with a Turkish lawyer. Is there any violence in your relationship of critical significance when we're contemplating a potential Hague child abduction case? Is there any possibility of getting the father to consent to your trip? She will ask me whether she can get consent to go on vacation and then pretend it's a vacation and then do a stayover. Happens all the time. But there will be ways that you can discuss with the client, the ways to manipulate the situation, possibly to get dad to consent to more than just a holiday back home in New York. Let's explore the possibility of you running to court in Turkey and getting a Turkish order that authorizes you to relocate, especially if you are married and if the father therefore automatically under Turkish law has equal custodial rights and there has thus far been no Turkish order. So what we're then doing is we're contemplating what would happen if she takes the children on the plane without the authorization of the father or without the express authorization of the Turkish court, and she's married. If she is not married, probably you want to work with a Turkish lawyer as well. Probably the answer is run to the airport now and get out of there, because under Turkish law, I believe she has sole custody, and therefore she has the sole right to leave. If she comes to the States, then she faces two critical laws, not one. We're not just talking about Hague abduction, we're talking about uniform child custody law. So what is the Hague Convention? Hague Convention that we're talking about is the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction. It basically says that if you take a child away from the child's habitual residence without the consent of somebody who has a custodial right with respect to the child, then the child should be returned forthwith. Within 6 weeks is the target date, unless one of the very limited defenses is proven by the left-behind parent. There are now more than 90 countries that are signatories to the convention, and they include Turkey and they include the United States. If she comes on the plane and arrives here, she must expect that dad will initiate a Hague case by filing an application with either the Turkish Central Authority or directly with the American Central Authority, which is the U.S. Secretary of State. But merely filing the application is nothing. It is basically almost irrelevant. What dad really has to do is start a case, a litigated lawsuit under the International Child Abduction Remedies Act in the United States, which is a federal law. The federal and state courts have concurrent jurisdiction. And if I'm representing the father in that kind of a situation, if there is any claim by mother, potential claim of violence at all, I want the case in the federal court. I do not want it before the state court, before a family court judge. I wanted it before a federal court who will apply the treaty by the letter of the law. The 6 defenses are very limited. Number 1, consent. Dad consents to not just a holiday, not just a vacation, but the actual relocation. 2, acquiescence, meaning that Dad, after the fact, consents, and must do so under our jurisprudence in a relatively formal way. 3rd one is Dad waits for 1 year, and the child has become settled in New York before starting the case, not starting the application, starting the case. The 4th one is the child in question is mature in the, excuse me, I'm just going to. The 4th one is the child is mature enough for the child, and the child objects. The child's objections are going to be tested on the standard of whether the taking parent is seen to have influenced the opinions of the child, excuse me, and whether the child is old enough. The 5th defense is that returning the child would violate human rights. That has never worked, not one case to my knowledge. And the last defense is that there would be a grave risk of harm to the child if the child were returned to its habitual residence. That's the one that's always trotted out. That's the one that creates one of the issues that creates the enormous problems that we have in our courts and globally, and that's the reason why there is so much upset about some foreign countries not complying with the convention in the way that the Americans want it to be interpreted. In particular, great upset about the performance, frankly, of Turkey in this regard. In order to initiate a Hague case, Dad must have a right of custody. It must be a right of custody under the law of the habitual residence. What's the habitual residence? This is why you must talk to the client about how long has she been in Turkey and what was the deal when she went there. Perhaps she's only been there a year, perhaps she's only been there 2 years, or maybe 6 weeks. Is the child's habitual residence there? What is habitual residence? There is an enormous conflict between our federal circuits on how you determine habitual residence. I'm not going to discuss that, but basically it's a question of, do you look at the intent of the parents, or do you look at it through the eyes of the child? Has the child there, does it seem to the child that the child would think that his or her home is in the particular country? A right of custody is tested by, in this case, if the children are habitually resident in Turkey, we've got to know what Turkish law is about custodial rights. It is not a question of whether a court has given custody to the left-behind parent. The issue is there any type of custodial or quasi-custodial right that one could assert on behalf of Dad? For example, is there a rule that neither parent is allowed to take a child out of the country without the consent of the other parent? That's called a ne exeat provision. The U.S. Supreme Court has determined that if a parent has nothing but a ne exeat right, that is the right to a veto on a child leaving the country, that is a Hague Convention right of custody and authorizes the initiation of a case. A Hague case in New York is tried quickly throughout the states. It is required under the convention to be concluded wherever possible within 6 weeks. We don't do that as fast as we should because of appeals, but the case will be put generally at the top of the calendar, and there will be a trial. There will be a quick hearing on the issues that are raised. Those issues generally relate to: did Dad consent? Does Dad have a right of custody? Where is a habitual residence? That's created massive litigation and grave risk of harm. The grave risk of harm defense is limited. Is there harm? Would returning the child to Turkey put that child at risk, at significant risk of physical or psychological harm? But what if and it's always alleged, but what if the courts in Turkey have the right to and the power to and should provide the necessary protection. Why would we not recognize that Turkey is fully able to handle this, and normally we should? But if I'm representing the mother in that kind of a situation, I'm looking at the American reports on human rights, I'm looking at Refugee World, Canadian government's reports about enormous levels of domestic violence in Turkey. I'm going to try to establish a case that there would be a grave danger to the mother and the child because of conditions in Turkey, and I would have a pretty heavy burden of proof to meet, and it would be pretty hard to do that, but I would try. However, if Mom wins a Hague case, that's not the end of the story, because we in America have something called the Uniform Child Custody, Jurisdiction and Enforcement Act. And why is that relevant? That's relevant because what it says is that we here will recognize and enforce a foreign custody order if it was issued by a place that was the, quote, home state, unquote, of the child at the time the case was commenced. Home state is not habitual residence. It is basically the place where the child was living for the previous 6 months. And then there's a 6-month extension to that. So what does this mean? It means that we can go through an entire Hague case here in New York. The father could possibly lose the case. Meanwhile, he started a case in Turkey. If the Turkish court would take the case, even though the child was no longer physically there, he gets a Turkish order that gives him custody because mother has stolen the child. He takes that simply downtown to our state court, registers it, tells the judge, when it comes to a judge very quickly, that it's automatic. You have no role to play, judge, in not enforcing this order, provided, unless it is proven that Turkey was not the home state under American rules, and two, that mother was not given due process, meaning the right to appear in the Turkish court and notice thereof. There are no defenses beyond those that I've just mentioned, and so it is and this is astonishing to lawyers from the rest of the world, that we in America will basically ramp foreign custody orders if only the child was there for 6 months and the other parent is told of the case and given the chance to appear, and we are required under our domestic law to enforce them. We are not allowed to modify them. We must enforce them. We must send these children back to Turkey in that circumstance if that can occur.
You have 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay. A ton of what we do is trying to stop kids being abducted to foreign countries. So another call we'll get is from mom or dad who says, my child, he wants to take the child on vacation to Turkey where he's from, and I'm scared stiff that the child is never going to come back. Help me. And so people think that maybe hiding the passport, which is a good idea often, will solve it, or asking the judge to give some kind of a financial bond to make sure the child comes back from Turkey, maybe that would work. It never works. That's an exaggeration, but in my opinion, it never works. Why? Because my clients feel that children are priceless. And when a judge says you've got to put up a bond of $50,000 to secure the return of the child, what often a potentially taking parent is thinking is, $50,000, that's all it costs to buy a child, to take my child? That's a joke. A bond is never punitive enough. It can't be by definition to really apply pain to really prevent the taking. So we have lots of cases where we go to court and we ask the court to enjoin the child from being taken out of the country. Maybe from being taken out of the country, period. I've got one today where we want to stop an abduction, potential abduction to India, but what if the child goes to Canada and then gets on the plane from Canada and goes off to India? What I often do in these cases is we get expert testimony. One case where an Alaska case, mother is petrified that the child is going to be taken by the Turkish dad to Turkey. And I was an expert, I have to confess, on that particular occasion. Well, my opinion was very strong. if this child, my opinion was based that Turkey does not effectively enforce the Hague Convention. I hate to be so blunt and perhaps rude, but the European Court of Human Rights has lambasted Turkey on several occasions for not returning children under the Hague Convention promptly, and I cited enormous authority. A Turkish lawyer did the opposite and said Turkey is great and does apply the Hague Convention effectively. The matter is sub judice. The matter has not been decided yet. But we have to, the courts here have to determine, have to judge the quality of justice, if you like, of a foreign country in order to determine whether the courts in that foreign country are likely to return a child if a child is kept there longer than the agreed visitation period. Judges do not like being put in that position, but I think they have no choice whatsoever. So,
Thank you so much.
okay. A little bit.
Okay, we have extra 10 minutes.
Okay.
Sorry
So now I'm.
for disrupting.
Okay. So the problem that we have with Turkey would deal with, how can I put it? We can, if we're talking about my native country, which I still have a tiny bit of the accent left, of England, where you have a legal system that is parallel to ours, where we can get a mirror order from an English court, where if there is a visitation to England of a child and we're scared that the child is going to be kept in England longer than the assigned visitation period, we can insist, we can push the judge here to allow visitation only if the English court grants a mirror order that mirrors the terms of the American custody order. That will work in England. It will not work in Turkey. They don't do mirror orders, and you've just heard from the professor who says that custody orders from a foreign country are not recognized in Turkey on public policy grounds. They may be considered, but there is no requirement that they be recognized and enforced. The issue will be considered by the court, so there's no guarantee that a Turkish court is going to actually rubber stamp and quickly enforce the terms of an American custody order. And it has not happened in those cases that came before the European Court, where the European Court was upset that children were not returned. So we are then left with a nasty situation where children of Turkish origin may not be allowed to visit the place where one of their parents is of the native country of one of the parents, which is not right and is not fair. And the Hague Convention was expressly designed to allow, to encourage that kind of international child visitation. The challenge is that if I am representing the scared, potentially left behind parent, I am going to find out all those cases, unfortunately, where Turkey has not effectively, in my opinion, enforced the terms of the Hague Convention and sent children back forthwith. And there are lots of those cases, and the American State Department annually criticizes Turkey for not returning the children in conformity with the Hague Convention. I think maybe there are questions, and maybe it would be easier to deal.
I do like to ask a question, please. It's not my practice area, but it's commonly asked, and I'm being questioned. And I personally wonder one issue. When there are dual nationals, let's say that we have a U.S. citizen and Turkish citizen, and the child in the United States, and somehow the other parent, the Turkish citizen parent, is trying to enforce to take back the child to Turkey. Or we have the child in Turkey with the Turkish citizen, and the U.S. citizen parent is trying to bring the child back to here. So I have the common tendency to believe that if you share the nationality of the country that you're living in, somehow the law favors you, that they do want to enforce the law towards you, right? So would it be fair to say if the child is in the United States with the U.S. citizen child and parent, and the Turkish citizen parent is trying to bring back the child back to Turkey, the chances are the same, or do you think it would still be in favor of the U.S. citizen a little bit because of the nationality?
It's my experience that in this country, the nationality of the parent who is seeking to change the status quo is not significant. We've won many, many cases where for foreign nationals who have sought to get their kids back home to their home country, it would be improper for a court here to be significantly affected by nationality. The question arises perhaps with respect to considering whether there has been a change in the habitual residence of the child. So if a child comes from one place to another and somebody changes their nationality, then that is a significant showing, a demonstration of the fact that they are becoming habitually resident in that particular country. Apart from that, it should not be considered. Can I guarantee you that a court in the middle of the United States that has never handled a hate case before would be concerned about the nationality issue? The judge would probably be concerned about it, but he shouldn't be. In New York, it's not everyone here is from somewhere else, so it doesn't matter. Do foreign countries? Some foreign countries don't focus on nationality. Unfortunately, many do, and that's not right.
Because I was personally involved in one incident approximately 8 years ago. The father was a U.S. citizen, and the mom was from a European country, not Turkey, one of the Western European countries. And the mom had taken the child away from the father without a permission. And the case had started in the United States, and the U.S. judge had enforced that the child has to be brought back, and the mother has to be forced to return back to the United States and stay with the child if they want to share the joint custody. Otherwise, the child has to stay with the father. So for that specific case, at least from my personal experience, there was definitely the U.S. parent, being favored, for that situation.
I'm not going to comment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining this panel. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to extend my thanks again to the wonderful panel. To show our appreciation, of course, we got plaques. And I would like to invite one of our team members, Mr. Ayhan Öymen. He's here to present the plaques to our wonderful panelists. Thank you very much.
Can we have a pause right here? Just do here. Thank you so much for your attendance and helping us. This is for you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Teşekkürler. Şöyle ben vereyim. Şöyle poz vereyim.
Thank you very much again. So we're almost caught up in time. Wonder of wonder, miracle of miracles. And of course, with the first time around, there are always little mishaps. Another one happened. The food is delayed in New York traffic, but hey, who is not delayed in New York traffic? It's a fact of life. So right now, actually, I would like to present, with your permission, a very important person who graciously accepted our offer, came here to deliver our keynote speech. And I'm talking about Honorable Attorney General William Sorrell of Vermont, the great state of Vermont. Attorney General, please, thank you very much for coming and joining us. Attorney General Sorrell is the top attorney in the state of Vermont, and he's been in public service since 1975. He's a graduate of Notre Dame University and then Cornell Law School. He worked in private practice for a while, but then returned to public service, and has been the Attorney General of Vermont since 1998. And he's been constantly elected every single term ever since. And he was also the president of the National Association of Attorney Generals, which also awarded him with their Kelly Wyman Award in 2003. And it's my distinct privilege and pleasure to announce Attorney General of Vermont, Honorable William Sorrell. Thank you.
Well, the bad news is the food's not here. The good news is I'm not responsible for keeping you from your lunch. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm honored to have been invited to keynote this first conference. And my understanding is there are practicing lawyers here, law students, and undergrads considering law school. And, you know, I want to recognize whoever thought of bringing that group together. You deserve a lot of credit, because I can see that each of those three groups has not only something to learn, but something to impart to the others. And again, I'm honored to get the chance to talk to you a little bit today. And so thank you. But I also want to thank the Turkish government and the Turkish Coalition of America for bringing me and a number of my brother and sister AGs to Turkey this past spring. We had a wonderful week in Turkey, and it just so happens that we landed in Istanbul the day after the protests started at the end of May or the beginning of June, and we were in the country during a time when the eyes of the world were very much on Turkey, and any number of people in Vermont were watching CNN and such. And your president, we met with him, very gracious, the Minister of Justice, the head of your Supreme Court, prominent journalists, academicians, business leaders. Of course, we saw the sights. I did experience a little bit of tear gas, which was different, but not the fault of the host. That was when we were in Ankara, the protests, street fires and such were just a block from the hotel, and one night I and a couple of the others walked down there, and actually a couple of different nights. But a tremendous experience. And then also want to thank the Turkish Cultural Center of Vermont, which in November honored me at a dinner with the 2013 Community Service Award. So these last 10 months or so has all been all or much about Turkey for me, and I'm very fortunate. I want to speak to some of the ideas or reference the ideas of a couple of noteworthy philosophers. You might find them to be a little unusual, but bear with me. The first, Batman. And Batman, among other things, has said, with great power comes great responsibility. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And the other noteworthy philosopher was the late, great state senator from Vermont, Esther Sorrell. And if you note the last name, she was also my mother. And a wonderful mother, a great state senator. And my mom was of the view that the greater the gifts one has or receives, the more is owed. And I'll come back to those 2 points in a bit. But a little bit about my background. I am from Vermont, a native. For those of you who haven't been there, it's one of the most rural states in the country. North of here, our westerly border joins New York State. Total population about 630,000, so it's a small state, known for skiing and its great foliage, tourism and the like. Also known primarily for maple syrup and Ben & Jerry's ice cream. So for those of you who haven't visited Vermont, please come and enjoy our Vermont hospitality. And I think 11 members of the U.S. Olympic team will be competing in the next couple of weeks in Sochi, are either Vermonters or went to school or trained, have Vermont connections. I was brought up in a very middle-class family. My father spent his career in law enforcement. My mother was fortunate to go to college. She was a homemaker and mother, but she was also a community organizer, grassroots organizer who just believed passionately in our form of government and the ability, the one person, one vote, that you should be involved. You have the responsibility to be involved. And 4 sisters, no brothers, so I was the prince. Good and bad news, I got waited on quite a bit by my sisters, but I also had to do virtually all of the leaf raking, lawn mowing, and shoveling and the like, and also delivered our morning newspaper for 6 years, early in the morning in elementary school and through high school. Of my sisters, 2 ended up becoming nurses, another a physical therapist, and the third an elementary school teacher. And so sort of service and contributing was important in my family. Vermont has an interesting political history in that from just before our Civil War in the 1850s up into the 1960s, Vermont elected Republican governors, 108 years in a row. We were a one-party state. Now, guess what party my mother was organizing for? Not the Republican Party. She believed in the Democratic Party. She believed in the dairy workers and the factory workers and such, that she thought the Democratic Party was advanced the interests of the common working folks, in her view, more than the Republican Party. And when she died in the late 80s, after having served 10 years in the state Senate herself, the newspaper accounts referred to her as the mother of the Democratic Party in Vermont. And Vermont is very much a Democratic state now. Our governor, our House of Representatives, and our Senate are all Democrats. I, too, am a Democrat. There's only one statewide official right now who comes out of the Republican Party. But when I was a kid, my parents' friends, many of them were lawyers, and many of them politically active, and they would be around our kitchen table scheming about this campaign or the other. And so I thought I was really quite taken by these lawyers who seemed to be energetic and accomplished. And so I think from grade school on, I started thinking, yeah, I want to go to law school. I want to be one of these lawyers. I went off to undergraduate school, and I think I maybe wasn't quite so enamored as I had been in the 6th grade or whatever, but as it got junior year of undergraduate school, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. And as I looked at the options or possible options of going to medical school or getting a PhD or maybe an MBA, I thought the JD, the Juris Doctor degree, gave me the most flexibility, that perhaps I could go into business, perhaps I could teach or practice law in any number of different ways. And so I actually went to law school more to give myself options than that I had this career path mapped out. And becoming the Attorney General was the furthest thing from my mind. And I have to say, early in law school, I wasn't sure I had made the right decision. It seemed like there was so much sort of moral relativity in the law, and you argued your client's side of this, and you get 2 lawyers in a room or 10 lawyers in a room, you can get 10 different arguments with the same situation. And I thought, gee, maybe I should have gone to medical school where there's some moral certainty. The patient's sick, needs this, and I do it, and I don't have to sort of be weighing this and that. Well, I don't know what happened to those thoughts, but I guess I took another course or two and thought, particularly the litigation-related courses, evidence, criminal procedure, trial and appellate advocacy, and the like. And I was really taken by that, and I stayed the course. And because I was more interested in the trial nature of law practice than, although I did okay academically, I didn't see myself as an academic lawyer, and research and writing was not. I'd rather be up on my feet in front of a jury or the keynote speaker at something like this, maybe something in my personality, I guess. But I was advised, listen, if you want to be a trial lawyer, then become a public defender or a deputy prosecutor. You'll get into court quickly, on your feet, get experience. And that's what I did. Tried a lot of cases as a prosecutor just out of law school. Then went into private practice of law for 10 or 11 years. And then in late '89 got a call from the then governor who there was a vacancy in the chief prosecutor's position in Burlington, Vermont, and asked if I would fill it. She wasn't enamored of, in Vermont, if an elected position becomes vacant, it's the governor's appointment for the remainder of the term until the voters can fill the position. And so the then governor apparently didn't want to appoint those who were interested in being appointed, and reached out to me and asked me if I would do it. I'm not sure whether this, from some perspectives was a good career choice, because I took like a 75% pay cut to do that. That was in '89, and forget adjusting for inflation, I do not make anywhere near as much money today as I was making in 1989 in private practice. So you might think you got a really crazy keynote speaker here who makes bad career choices. But I really enjoyed getting back into prosecution and the camaraderie that went along with that. And I did that for about 3 years, and then by then another governor, Howard Dean, some of you might remember, he ran for president. He was a friend of mine. He was very close to my mother, and she actually got him involved in politics when he was a young doctor living in Burlington. And he reached out to me and asked me to come into the hierarchy of his administration. And so I went over to the state capitol as in what's called Secretary of Administration, the senior cabinet position in Vermont government. You kind of run the budget, tax policy, chief spokesperson for the governor and the legislature. Is a very tough job, but you got to know a lot about finance. And I said to the governor, Howard, I don't know anything about finance. You know, you sure? Why me? And he goes, you're smart, you're honest, you're going to do great. And 5 years later, I was, I knew a lot about how government runs. And the governor appointed my predecessor as AG, Chief Justice of our Supreme Court, and so he had to fill the position of Attorney General. And so in the spring of '97, even though I'd never really thought about being Attorney General, lo and behold, I'm appointed Attorney General in the spring of '97, and I am such a lucky guy because I hold a wonderful job. Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the state, and you know, back to those issues about moral relativism in law school and such. It might sound trite. I think my job is to try to do the right thing every day. And how reinforcing is that if that's your job and you do it? And, you know, my parents were really of the view that you want to try to leave the world a better place than you found it. And so I'm the one who gets to sort of cast the first stone against those who have violated our laws, whether it's our environmental laws, our consumer protection laws, our criminal laws. And also, as Attorney General, I get to make a lot of efforts to enhance the public health. And so I've been very aggressive against trying to combat the greatest avoidable public health problem that we face in this country, addiction to tobacco. And now, what's the second greatest avoidable public health problem in this country that's catching up and likely to surpass tobacco? Obesity. And I've been trying to do a lot of work in both of those areas. I take an oath of office, and included in the oath is, and think about this, I swear to do equal right and justice to all persons to the best of my judgment and ability according to law. Now, human nature being what it is, you got your friends over here and you got your enemies over here. You reward your friends, you punish your enemies. That's human nature, for most people anyway. But that's not the oath that I take, nor the oath that I administer to every single one of my new assistant AGs. I'll do equal right and justice to all persons to the best of my judgment and ability according to law. That's a tall order if you take it seriously. And I tell my new AGs, read the ethical rules. For enforcement, public sector enforcement attorneys, you are not to be just a zealous advocate for a position and leave it to the jury or the judge to determine who's guilty or not. Under the ethical rules, if you're a public prosecutor, you are to seek justice. And so I tell my AAGs, if you don't know and you throw the book at somebody and you're leaving it to somebody else to decide, you are shirking your responsibilities under our ethical rules. And the responsibility to cast the first stone is a huge responsibility. And so back to Batman. With great power comes great responsibility. Now, before I talk about gifts, I'll say another thing that philosopher Esther Sorel said And she said, don't get too full of yourself. And what great advice that was, because I'll just tell you this one little story. In Vermont, as in most states, the AG is an elected position. And I'm the last popularly elected two-year term AG in the country. So I have to run every even-numbered November. So I was appointed in 97, but started running in 98. And along about, it's probably 02 or so, I've been AG for 6 years, you need to get, I think it's 500 signatures on petitions to get your name on the ballot to run. So the petitions were due, let's say July 20th that year. I roped my then probably 12-year-old son to coming down, way down to the southern part of the state, to Brattleboro, which has the largest July 4th or Independence Day parade in the state. Thinking, well, I'll march in the parade, wave a lot, shake hands with the voters, but then I'll get a bunch of signatures on nominating petitions. So the parade's over, and we're walking down the main street of Brattleboro, and got several petitions to get signed, and come up to a group of about 6 folks. They looked like they were in their 30s, and excuse me, sir, Bill Sorrell, do you mind signing a nominating petition to get my name on the ballot for Attorney General? And the guy who takes it, and the others are waiting with him, looks like this, and he goes, you bet. You got to be better than the guy who's in there now. My son's mouth is open about that wide, and as soon as we start walking down the street, he goes, Dad, did you hear what that man said? I said, yeah, but he signed the petition, buddy. But my mom said, the more gifted you are, the more you owe. And I think most people, I know I do, and I bet many of you, we think we're average. And we are average in the groups with which we move. And I'm going to use a rather blunt instrument to say very clearly that every single person in this room has great gifts. And the instrument I'll use, and I know it's debated about whether it's culturally biased and this and that, is IQ. It's a computer age. We talk about CPUs, central processing units. How much data can be gathered, assimilated quickly, stored, and used to make decisions? Well, that's a rough, very AG layperson's view of what IQ is all about. And the average IQ, different countries is a little different, and they say the IQ in the average in the United States is coming down a little bit. I don't know. But it's about 100. That's average. And about 68% of people have an IQ between 85 and 115. If you have a 4-year college degree or are likely to receive one, then on average, your IQ is in the 115 to 120 range. On average. So let's say you have an IQ of 115. For every one of you, there is someone out there with an IQ of 85. It's a bell curve. There's same on the right as on the left. The U.S. military, the minimum that they will accept is 85. That's the minimum. U.S. military a few years ago decided to try to do extra training and drop their admission standards down to 80. And it was ultimately rejected because of the view that it took too much effort for too little reward. But for every one of you with a 115, somebody there with 85. And then, if you have a PhD, an MD, a JD, MBA, well now it's likely your average IQ is somewhere in the 125 range. Obviously, there are some way brighter and others on the other side of that. But on average, 125 or so. You know what percentage of the U.S. population has an IQ around 125? 2.1%. So if you are in the 125 range and you walk out on the street, of the first 99 people you see, there's going to be one who's got 125 or higher, and the other 98 are going to be lower. And I know this is a blunt measure. You are gifted. Your CPU is faster, more efficient than average. And we talk about power and responsibility. We're not just talking about power like as being the Attorney General to prosecute people. When you talk about power, power comes in different ways. And the ability to handle information, to assimilate data, and make decisions is a very powerful position to be in. Can you imagine going through life always trying to catch up, to understand what's going on around you, to make good decisions about your own life or your children's, whether it's in the financial arena or the health arena, whom to vote for, whatever. And so simply by being able, having an IQ that allows you, if you use it, to assimilate, manipulate data, and make reasoned, informed decisions more readily, more quickly, understanding more of the nuances than others, is not only a gift, but hugely empowering. So my suggestion to you is that you have great power, and along with that power comes responsibility to try to make this world a better place. And whether it's involvement in public service, whether it's elective public service or the nonprofit arena, or the volunteer work, the school board or the city council or whatever, you have an obligation, given your gifts, to give back more, and you have, given your power, you have the responsibility to exercise that power in a responsible way. So I will end my remarks, and if the food is here, we can get to that. Otherwise, I'll field a few questions. But I'll end my remarks by just saying thank you again, and since you have the power and you are gifted, go forth and do great things. Make a lot of money if you want. There's nothing wrong with that. But leave this world better than what you found it, so that your kids can go on and do the same after you. Thank you very much.
I have a
Well, let's
question.
get another warm applause for Attorney General Sorrell, please. Louder, louder. He was gracious. He accepted our offer, came all the way down from Vermont. Thank you very much.
I
thanks for
have a
emphasizing-
question, though. You know.
Attorney General, this young man is one of our Turkish-American law students. He was very instrumental in organizing this. He helped with our every single whim, and we would like to thank him at this point, too.
Thank you. Arda, I have a question. Here. I'm sorry. I cannot let him go. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today, dear Attorney General Sorrell. But you have been serving as the Attorney General in Vermont for the longest term, as far as I know.